Alright, so this is my wife's old computer case. Computer runs fine, there's nothing really wrong with it, but I'm going to be upgrading graphics card, and unfortunately it won't fit in this case at all. So I bought a new case. Alright, so this is a new case manufacturer for me. I've used a number of cases in the past, but yeah, this brand I've never even heard of till I was looking for it. I needed a full ATX case, and because the 970 that's in my current computer, it's going in the wife's, won't fit in her case, which I'll have photos of in a little bit. But yeah, so this is my first look at this thing. Initial impressions is it's fairly stout. The only thing that I ran into is the paint on the case was just starting to fuse the side covers in there, but as soon as I put a little leverage on it, it decided it was going to break loose and everything was fine. Alright, and I'd also like to point out that the right behind the I/O on the top of the case has a SATA dock. So you just lay the drive on the top of the case and it just locks right in. Fairly clean way of doing it, much better than the drop-in insert that I have in the front of my case for doing the same thing. Here I finally broke out a screwdriver, taking off these side covers, and you know the biggest complaint I have about this case is the lack of a hand grip area. So you can put a little more leverage on the side case and then just pop back just like a normal case. And then the second knock is I don't really care for the quick change latch system for the disk drives. It doesn't work as well as I think it should. You know, basically all it does is put a little pressure on the side of the drive, and it might be that it was intended for a different more modern drives than I have. Even though one of my drives is only a couple years old, it's still it doesn't interlock at all, or it doesn't interlock in the position where it's flush with the case front. And now getting a look at the wife's old computer case side by side with the new one. Not a lot of room in this one, but quite a bit more room in this other new case. Okay, so this is me removing the restraining screws on the Blu-ray and DVD burner drive. At the time I was putting this together, the DVD-R drives, or the Blu-ray-R drives, were a little more pricey than I was willing to spend. I think the Blu-ray drives are only about $50 right now. This computer was set up where we could actually tether an HDMI cable into the kids' room and either play movies that are off on the hard drive or just drop a disc in. And that way then you don't end up with damaged discs in their bedrooms, because that's how kids are. And this is my first good look at the drive latching system. It works okay. It basically for the drives I have, it just puts a bunch of side pressure on them. It doesn't actually latch into the screw holes, and it might just be that more modern drives have slightly different hole configurations than the ones I have, but to actually get it lined up with the front of the case, I just put pressure on the one side and then use the retaining screws on the other to actually lock it down properly. Somehow along the way I didn't push record, and when I was doing the motherboard transfer from the old case to the new one, but as always, got the I/O shield in, got all the screws threaded in without actually seating them down, and then went through and methodically made sure everyone was seated. I think my least favorite part of doing the cases is the front I/O, specifically the reset button, power button, and LEDs. I'm pretty sure I got this one wrong because the reset button's not working. Power button works, so that's good enough. Now I'm going through and getting a good look at the fan controller and for all the different case fans. This case actually glows red when it's all powered up. Yeah, I took and I'm feeding most of the cables through the backside for all the power management. Just gives a much cleaner look when it's all done. As many people have proven that cable management isn't really required. However, I like to make it look nice. Can't always be helped, but we can do our best to make it not look like some haphazard, slap together build. Just comes down to quality of what you want to do, but also to allow clearance around your different components. You got to make sure everything's tucked away. In this case, that 970 that's going in there takes up the bulk of the bay, and there's just not a whole lot of room off the front end of it to clear a big bundle of cables. This case actually has quite a bit of room on the back side. Once you run the wires through the pass-through slots that are built into the case, it even has a bump out, so you don't have to make any hard bends with the wiring. Here I'm struggling with the Molex connector for the power, for the fan power. I really don't like the Molex connectors. Pretty much every case I've ever had, that's been one of the weak points of it. And then also finding out that some of my SATA cables are a little on the short side. Like this particular cable came from previous builds, and they just don't. The new ones tend to come much longer than the older ones. I'll probably end up swapping this one out at some point, but it worked for powering up at least one of the drives once I moved it to an alternate spot. But not too important. Just got to make sure you don't have any tension on the connectors when it's actually installed. And unfortunately, you can't see it very well, but I'm actually playing with the cables as they wrap around the backside, trying to get them laid out nice. I really, again, just wanted to make it look as clean as possible when it's all put together, and trying to make some logical sense on some of the bends. I ended up pulling cables back out and running them different directions and everything else, just trying to make it as neat as possible, and also trying to make it so even though they're neat, but they're also running in the same directions. You almost make like a little loom out of the cables. It just adds to the overall visual when everything's all running nice and neatly together. Alright, and here I'm making the final preps for the GTX 970 to go into this build. Getting the shields out of the back of the case. And here is the 970, not fitting in the old case at all. I'd have to carve out a whole bunch of metal to make it fit, and it fits just beautifully in this full ATX case. These are same manufacturer, but you can see the great difference in length. And here it is, all nice and neat, tucked in there. And the computer booted up without any real issues. Alright, here I'm getting the I/O shield ready for install. One of those little important things that can get forgot if you don't do it first thing. So there it is, getting snapped into the case. I didn't used to do the installs out of the case, but with my gaming rig, I found it was much easier to install the aftermarket heatsink and everything else. but I'm making sure I'm lining up the little arrow on the socket shield and the socket, and making sure it's clocked correctly. And these intels just drop in, and you just latch them down, pops the little protective cover out of the way. Currently getting the heatsink and fan assembly out of the box, and I made sure to where my fan header was, so I'd have a good slack on the cord, and it's not going to interfere with the fan at all. I'm actually pulling it a little away from the fan, so I have a little extra clearance. And I got to install the RAM. I only went with 8 gigabytes of DDR4. This build, by doing a single stick, allows them to upgrade to 16 gigs down the road, but he only has an i3 in there, which will be plenty for the games he wants to run. Not the most high-end gaming build, however it'll keep up just fine. And now we're moving on to shifting the standoffs for the different motherboard. This motherboard is a fair bit shorter than the one that was in there, and they added another standoff on the bottom corner of the board. It really is better to assemble these computers laying on their side. You don't have to worry about gravity pulling the motherboard down and smashing things on the back side on the standoffs. But what I like to do is get the I/O shield area all locked in nicely, and then get one screw in to kind of pin it all in place. Again, these are all just being loosely installed, and then I'll go through and tighten them all up nice and uniformly. I tend to just start on, once they're all the threading is started, I'll go through and just make sure I don't miss any as I work my way up the motherboard. It's whatever system works best for you. And now here I'm starting to get all the power connectors plugged back in. This case I already had all the cable management basically done, so I'm just unplugging and replugging into a new motherboard and verifying I don't miss anything along the way. A few of the parts going into this build actually are coming out of his old system, which is a Dell Workstation dual CPU Xeon with a pile of RAM, but unfortunately the processors are just not up to the task for any, the single core performance is so low that gaming is nearly impossible. Most high-end games are well below the 30 frame minimum. GTA, that's an example, it was running 15 to 20 frames on absolute minimum settings, and it didn't matter what graphics card we put in there. So that prompted this build, which should do much better. This MSI motherboard actually had the front panel connectors much better marked on the board, so I could just eyeball them without the difficulty I was having on that much older ASRock board in the other computer. And now I'm getting his 1 terabyte Seagate in, and gonna be moving on to the DVD-ROM drive. This case actually had really nice rubber mounts for the hard drive, so you don't have any vibration issues or anything like that. Unfortunately, in doing that, it does require tools to change it out, unlike most modern cases where they're toolless. And also, it's hardware you don't just have in your pile. I am setting up all the drives where I can, the extra power connectors in the position where I want to add in, because I'd like to put a solid state in this computer at some point, and also a Blu-ray drive, which was one of his requests. But we'll have to let the budget recover before we do anything more to this computer. Many people think physical media is dead, and in some ways it is, but I prefer it still. There's nothing quite like having a hard copy of something where you didn't have to burn it, you don't have to re-download it, you don't have to worry about a digital license key. you just have it in hand. And so, like I said, I just prefer it. And anyway, yeah, putting the drive in, getting it all hooked up. Yeah, this computer fired off pretty much without a hitch. We didn't have any big surprises with it. The only problem I actually ended up having wasn't related to the computer, was the monitor cable was dying. So I got one of those on order. It'll be in tomorrow. Yeah, you put the cable one side and then it shut the monitor off, put it on the other side, and it fires right back up again. So yeah, definitely not a computer issue. But performed pretty much as advertised. So overall, pretty happy with the build.